Hello humans, it's me, Yelly, or Yellbell Beauty, here on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads. Today we're going to dupe some palettes. I am really happy to continue doing this. While I did complete my 4 months of no buy, I am still on a low buy, so whenever I have an interest in a palette from now on, I want to be able to see if I can dupe it first before I go out and buy it. Now, there are going to be some instances where I might try to dupe it and it's like close enough and that's good enough for me. Sometimes I try to dupe it and it's not good enough for me and then I wind up buying it. So, this is just a really good exercise for me personally. And this is really just a reminder for all of you that you don't need every new thing in the makeup world. You can, see what you have in your collection, especially if you have an extensive singles collection like mine. You need to use what you have. So let's just jump right in. So the first palette I want to dupe today, I'm going to put up here on this screen. It's from Kaima Cosmetics. I've actually never tried anything from Kaima before, but I was really interested in this launch, and it's called the Skulls and Roses palette. I actually haven't seen really anybody talk about this. I was kind of looking around to see, who might have swatched it, who might have had it. And at least in my circles, I haven't found anyone who swatched it. This palette retails for $61 US, and while that's not, the craziest price tag, I have Natasha Denona palettes, I have Pat McGrath palettes. I am not willing, in my opinion, to shell out $61 for a formula that I don't know. This would be my first foray into Kaima, so for me, this is something that I think I can dupe, and I will be pretty happy with duping and not purchasing because of that price tag. The swatches I'm referring to come directly from a reel on the Kaima Cosmetics Instagram. Unfortunately, I don't know if there's a creator that I can credit. I would assume that it might just be the owner, someone who works for the company. So anyone whose swatches I reference in this video will be linked down below. So I want to just, make that clear that the reason that the creator for this isn't credited is because it seems to be coming directly from the brand. I've got my Death and Candy Custom Creations palette here just for us to build the palette into this empty magnetic palette. So I want to do the shimmers to start off and then we'll do the mattes. So the very first shimmer is called Sorcery and it looks like a deep plum. So let's put this aside and look through my singles and see what we have. Since I did one of these, I did rearrange my singles quite a bit, so things might be kind of all over the place. So let's see. This one right here, this is Bewitched, I think, from Touch of Glam. This looks a little bit too much of a blue purple. Looking at this, with my eye right now, not a swatch at the palette, I don't think I'm going to have anything in here. This is all Touch of Glam and Quicksand that will be close enough to that shade. So let's look in the next palette. This is all my Sydney Grace and Dandelions Co. And then there's actually 2 Give Me Glow shadows in here, but I feel like we're going to have to pull this one out more for the mattes. I'm not necessarily going to find many of the shimmers in here, so put that off to the side. This is where we might find something. This is all of my Davina and Cleona. This is one Clarity Cosmetics shade. So let's see. I feel like there could be a Davina one, so looking at it head on, the closest one that I've seen thus far in my collection might be this. This is the shade Ritual from Davina, and it's just a deep purple with a black base. I'm going to pop this into the palette, and if we find something better going through, I will pull that, but for now, I'm going to go with this. The next shade, Trance, looks like potentially a pinky purple. Let me pull up the swatch for that. It's looking more like a rose gold in these swatches from the brand. So I do think that there's something comparable to that I can pull, so hold on one second. This right here from Give Me Glow is called Roses Remix, and this is what I would call a true rose gold. While it's going to be bigger than all the other shadows in the palette, I'm perfectly fine with that, so I'm going to pop that in. The next shimmer is the shade Chroma, which looks like one of those deeper fuchsia shades, and I'm positive I have something like this. I think a good bet could be in here. These are my Touch of Glam and Quicksand Cosmetics shadows. It's interesting, in the swatch it looks much lighter than I thought it would be, because in the pan it looks like it would be like one of these shades right here, which this is Blood Hollow, and I think this one is Raspberry Fizz. But when it's swatched out, it seems to be much lighter and almost have like a look what I would compare to Terra Moon Starburst. So let me swatch these and then I'll compare them to Terra Moon Starburst and show you all what I mean. So right here, this is Blood Hollow from Quicksand Cosmetics. This is Raspberry Fizz from Quicksand Cosmetics. Now, for comparison, this is Starburst from Terra Moons. It looks much closer to something. Let me take off my watch. I feel like I do this every time I film videos with y'all. I am so sorry. I don't know why I don't just take it off first. So, in the swatches, it looks much closer to something like this. This pink to blue type of duochrome. Interestingly enough, this also does remind me of one of the Cleona shades that I have. I can't think of it off the top of my head. I'm a little bit up in the air because I do quite like the way that that deeper purple looks, so it's not necessarily an exact dupe, but I feel that putting that deeper purple in there will satiate my want for the palette. So I think what I'm going to do is go with Raspberry Fizz because it's like the closest in between. Our next shimmer looks like a light gold. In the pan to me, it almost looks like a true gold, but in the swatches, it's a light gold. I could really go either or. I do have one idea in particular looking at this shade, so let me pull that. This shade right here is Warrior for Mon Professional, and I think that this would look really nice with those deeper, grungier tones in the palette, regardless of what the real palette looks like. So I'm going to put this one in. Now the next shade I think could be a toss-up. The next shimmer is called Skulls with a Z, Skullz. And it looks like a black with multicolored glitter in it. Now, I do have something that comes to mind. Actually, I have two that come to mind, but I don't know if they're going to be exact dupes, and I think I'm okay with that. Both of them are actually in here. So the first one that comes to mind, it's Britney Bitch from Touch of Glam, and then this is Mona Lisa from Quicksand Cosmetics. And they're both a black, or I believe Mona Lisa in particular, I'd say is a deep blue, with those larger chunks of glitter in it, so I'll swatch them out for you. So here they are on my fingers. So this one right here, it's Britney Bitch, and then this is Mona Lisa. Looking at the swatches, it looks like it's a more cool-toned shadow, so it would probably be closer to Mona Lisa. I think I'm okay with pulling in Mona Lisa because the next one is also a black with gold flecks, which looks a little bit warmer, which I do think I have an exact dupe for. So I'm going to take Quicksand Cosmetics Mona Lisa and put that in. Our next shimmer shade is called Jinx, and it is a black with gold sparkles. I do have what I would perceive as an exact dupe to that. This is Black Flame Candle from Pretties for Your Face. I don't know if they make this anymore. It wasn't necessarily a single that you could buy. I believe it came in like a bundle or one of those magnetic palettes that, I don't know if they make them anymore, but they used to make them at least, and it was one about the Sanderson sisters in particular. This I am going to pull in. I will say that this is one that I find really unique. Like, for a lot of my Pretties for Your Face shadows, and I definitely talked about this when I decluttered, I feel like I could find a lot of dupes for these when cross-referencing in my collection, but this one in particular, I have nothing else like. So, I'm going to pull that one in. The next shade is called Dazzle, and it seems to me, am I using the correct color term here? Like a pewter? I think I would call that like a pewter. So let's see what I can find here. All right, so the shade looks more cool toned to me, so I wouldn't go for this like greeny gold. This one might work, and this one actually, on second thought, this one actually looks perfect. This is the shade Air Glow. It's one of the Divina Moonscapes, and it's one of those chunkier, piecier shimmers. It's really beautiful. I wish Divina would make more shadows like this in different colors, because while they're not multi-chromes, they're like the perfect shimmer in my opinion. So I really do love these. The last shimmer is actually kind of surprising to me. When I look at this palette, my eyes kind of go everywhere. Those grungier tones in the first few rows, and then the bottom row has that bright red in it, and then also this like purple to blue duochrome it looks like, which I certainly have, but I don't know if I would have necessarily put that shade there. Let's see if I have something that's maybe a bit grungier for that, because like I do think that I could do better and then, you know, feel pretty good about that. But again, while I do have shades like this and I think shades like this are pretty, I don't know if I want it in my version of the palette. So let's see what we've got. So one shade that kind of comes to mind that could fit here, this is Flame Blown from Kaima. It's one of those black-based multi-chromes. And it has that deeper kind of grungy purple effect. This is one that I think could go nice with the palette, so let's put that on the side as an option. I don't know if I would pick any of these Duping shades here in particular. So let's see what else we have. Something that comes to mind, actually, it's a Hollow Misunderstanding palette from Touch of Glam, and some of these grungier shades in here, like this one, Deep Dark and Mysterious, really speaks to me, and it's a hollow, and it has all those deep glitters. And I kind of feel like nothing else might be able to compete with this in my mind once I swatch it, so. Oh my god, yeah. Like, look at that. I don't even know if the camera's gonna do that justice. I mean, I think it's just no contest. I shouldn't even keep looking. Let's just use that Touch of Glam one. So those are all the shimmers in this palette. I know it looks a little ridiculous right now with the setup I've got going on, but also, you know, because that one Give Me Glow shade is so big. But let me just make sure everything is in the right spot here. Okay. So that's roughly where everything should go in this palette. So now let's fill in the mattes. Alright, so the very first shade in the palette is a matte named Crowned. It looks like a yellowy neutral. There's probably a word for this color, and I just don't know it. I am so sorry. So this right here is Sydney Grace and Dandelions Co. I actually don't see a perfect fit in here. The closest one would be this one from Sydney Grace, which I believe this is Mango Tea off the top of my head, but this is a little bit too dark. One thing that does come to mind, though, in the second row, we have this shade Cryptic, which looks pretty much like this one right here, which is Dijon from Dandelions Co. So I'm going to pull that now while we have this open. We could also pull the shade Allure, which is the third one in the top row. And it looks quite close to this shade right here from Dandelions Co. This is Flambe, so I'm going to pop that in. I think we'll probably come back here for those reds, so in particular those are called Ravish and Roses. I think that we might have some in here, but I don't know if I want to keep them, particularly roses, that bright of a color. So I'm going to put this to the side for now. And here we have Lethal, Shroud NBA, Menagerie, Mon Professional. It's just kind of like a conglomerate of things. Again, I don't see anything that really catches my eye in particular right now. Maybe if I muted down one of the reds, one of these three would work, which one of these is Aphrodite. I believe it's this one, right? Yeah, this is Aphrodite from the Divinity palette. This is definitely Strawberry Shortcake, or just Shortcake from Creepy Cute 2. And then, what is this one even? This is Tough Guy from Creepy Cute 2. So I don't see anything I want to pull right now, but these could be a possibility for those reds. I'm pulling out this palette in particular because one single black that I have, which is the first that came to mind, this is from Terra Moons. This is the shade Split, and it's just a matte black. So I'm going to pop that in. That's the very last shade in the palette, and it's called Raven. This palette is kind of a mishmash, so this is primarily things that I've depotted from palettes. Here over, all of these from Copacetic they were all sold as singles, they would not be from palettes. All of these flakies from Copacetic, most of them I got in bundles, which were singles, so like these ones in particular, this, like that whole grouping. But then a lot of these came from palettes from companies that a lot of times I don't necessarily support anymore. I have some Pacifica shadows in here. There's nothing wrong with Pacifica. I think Pacifica is great. But we have Jeffree Star in here. We have Juvia's Place is like a large portion of this. We have a few Norvina shadows from the Anastasia Beverly Hill, like larger Norvina palettes. And then there are some Ace Beauté ones in here because in particular, the old formula of Ace Beauté, I really liked the mattes. I did not like the shimmers, so I kept just the mattes from the palette that I had. So this is just kind of like a mishmash of things. And from here, I think that we might be able to get something like kind of close to some of these. So off the top of my head, I thought that I did have a Juvia's Place shadow that looked like that first yellowy one, but I must have decluttered it, which means I have something comparable in a palette. So let's just double check all my singles, but if not, then I need to pull out some palettes. Here's one that's pretty close. This is in the Natasha Denona Sunrise palette. This is the shade Morning. Yeah, so this must be the closest one that I have. It does look quite similar. I'd say this one is a little bit peachier, but good. It's good enough for me. And with that, we finished the top row. In the swatches, it seems like Savage is kind of one of those like greeny brown shades when it's swatched out. So that leads me to one of these two. One of these is from the Juvia's Place. Oh god, what was that palette? It was like a Harvest palette. I don't even remember anymore. They didn't name any of the shades in that palette. And then the other one, I believe that's this one, is Golden Apple from Ace Beauté, which is from the Classical Paradise palette. They do look quite similar, but one of them is a little bit deeper. Their formulas are also quite different. The Ace Beauté, I would say, is more stiff. But I think the closer of the two is this deeper one, which is the Juvia's Place shade. So I'm going to pull that one in. The shade Enamor looks like it might be pretty close to this shade right here, which I believe is Earth from Ace Beauté. Yes, this is Earth from Ace Beauté, and it's kind of like that reddy, purpley, deep color, so I'm going to pull this one in. There might be a little bit more purple, but I think that this is pretty spot on for what I'm looking for. And now all we have left are two red shades. So Ravish looks like a kind of base toned red, but almost as if you turned the saturation down. So it's like this with less saturation. And then Roses looks like a bright orangey red. So I don't see either of those in here, so I'm going to pull another palette. So for the brighter one, Roses, we could pull this. This one is Amore from Dandelions Co. It actually doesn't look quite as bright when swatched. I don't know if that's going to be good enough for me. Let's look at those Shroud shades. So we have Tough Guy, Shortcake, and Aphrodite. Tough Guy is definitely too orange. Between Shortcake and Aphrodite, I think Aphrodite is closer, but it's still not really what I'm looking for. We might have to pull out some palettes here. It's certainly come to my attention recently that reds is, like, that's where my collection is completely lacking. I don't really have a lot of nuance in the reds that I own, so that'll be interesting when looking towards what I want to add to my collection this year. Probably some reds. This is the ColourPop Cherry Crush palette. This is entirely reds. I think that in particular, the shade Ravish, we could use this shade Black Cherry. So I'm going to pull that one. What I think is so funny about this palette is I think that this has good ColourPop quality. Like, of all the ColourPop palettes, this one I think is one of the better ones. But I think it's funny that this one is called Black Cherry, but the darkest shade isn't Black Cherry. Like, y'all just, like, really didn't even try, did you? Come on, ColourPop. Anyway, I'm going to pull Black Cherry. Honestly, putting that in the palette looks ridiculous to me. I don't really know why that like looks so wrong with what I've chosen. It looks perfectly fine in their picture, but then looking at it here, I'm like, why the heck is that shade there? Honestly, I'm thinking what might serve me best here would be like purples or blues or even like a murky green. I just don't see the reds going with any of these, and maybe their shades have much more nuance. Like, I was looking at this one and it looked like a rose gold to me, but maybe that was much more of a red, and I got that wrong. It's kind of hard to tell. The only swatches I have are in this reel. I'm going to make the executive decision to pull out this red, and I'm just going to pick some shades that I think might look nice with this color story. That's one of the nice things about duping a palette. If you feel that there's a shade in a palette that you might not necessarily use, but you have all the other shades that you know that you'd use, it's, you know, pretty good deal. One purple that comes to mind, Dairy from It's Freaking Bats between Shroud and Batty Bean. I know this palette looks like disgusting and beat up and like there's shadow and all the other shadows, but bear with me on that one. But I think this could look nice in here because of all of those purples. Where that other brighter red was, I think I'm going to put in this murkier green. This is Wonderful World from Sydney Grace. So, while it looks a little wonky with this one big shade right here and its offset, this is my finished palette. Let's swatch it out and then see if I want to make any other last minute changes before finalizing this. Alright, I didn't space these swatches out very well. As you can see, if you could see this area in my arm right here, I do have kind of like some peeling skin. I had a scrape here and, you know, now that's where we're at. So I apologize for that. That probably doesn't look very nice, but I do think this looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is, obviously these are the rough swatches. I'm going to keep this, and I want to take some swatches for my Instagram. So if I do take those before this palette goes up, I am going to pop them in here. I do think that this captures the vibe, that grungy feel, and I was able to kind of add something when I took out those bright reds. So I'm happy with this. Let's move on to the next palette we're going to do. So the next palette I want to dupe is the Anti-Plagiarism palette from Sugar Rock. I actually know nothing about this brand. My friend Andromeda recently posted a picture and some swatches of this palette. From my understanding, this is a Chinese brand, and it's kind of one of those brands that is very difficult to get in the United States, where you would have to go on one of those websites where you pay for the product by having someone else go and shop it for you. I'm sorry, there's probably a word for a site like that. Like you're saying, oh, I want that eyeshadow palette, so here's some money, and then that person in China is going to then buy the palette and then ship it to you. I did ask Andromeda if I could use their swatches. They said yes, so thank you, Andromeda. I'm going to go off of their swatches, their pictures. Of course, I will link Andromeda down below. Please give them a follow. I think this palette kind of goes along that same theme that we saw in the other one, right? It's kind of that like grungy, deep palette. I think I'm really feeling these right now in the winter, so let's see what we can do here. None of the shades seem to have a name. If they do, maybe they were on the back of the palette, so I'm just going to kind of call them in the color that I think that they are. So let's start with shimmers. The first one in Andromeda swatches seems to be like the lightest, most like what I would call ethereal shade. And the very first one seems to be a green to pink duochrome, which I am certain I have by Shine by SD, so let's pull that. This shade right here, Bizarre, which was in collaboration with Bizarre Volta and M Jones 5018 on Instagram. This is a pink to green duochrome, and I think it captures it pretty well. So I am going to pull this one in to the palette. The next shimmer seems to be kind of like a murky gold or a lighter gold. Based on Andromeda swatches, there is a shade that's coming to mind from Divina, so let me see if it's as close as it is in my mind. So the shade Sour Spanx comes to mind. I believe this is from like the Willy Wonka collection. I mean, that looks like pretty spot on to me. So let's pull that one in. Now, the hardest one, I think, to find is going to be this red. This looks like something that I could compare to Odin's Eye Leon. Those of you that follow me on Instagram know that I have placed an order for Odin's Eye Leon. Like, I finally caved. I know that there's a lot of controversy around the formula. I'm ready to find out if it lasts on my dry. Yes, dry. My eyelids are so dry that they peel sometimes. It's gross and sad. But it's because I was on Accutane. So I have very dry eyelids, and I don't have shadows crease on me very often. My eyelids aren't particularly hooded. So I want to see how it works for me. The shade is really beautiful. So we'll try that out, but that's like a different video because right now it's in the mail. So we're going to have to just find what I would call like a good enough here because I don't have a red. The closest thing I might have to this is the shade Saris Waves from Terra Moons, which I will pull in a minute, but it's like way too bright. So hold on, let's look at that. So we have this shade right here. This is Saris Waves from Terra Moons, which it's just a bright red, and I think that this is too bright. Now we do have other options. This right here is Jupiter's Inferno, which is like a burgundy and black duochrome. This might be what we kind of have to use to go with like the spirit of it. While this is more like orange leaning than like a true red, it might be the closest thing we can get. This shade right here, Flame from Shine by SD, this is from the Halo Horizon collection, and it is a hollow, but I think it leans pretty orange. Yeah. I will say also, those of you that follow me on Instagram know that I discovered these swatch pretty horribly, but they look really beautiful in the eye with a glitter glue. So I would not judge the fact that it looks like this in a swatch. I would recommend these if you are okay with like big chunky pieces, but the swatching of them is just like, I don't know what it is. These do not swatch very well. Anyway, that might be too orange for what I'm looking for. I do have a red shimmer from Sydney Grace. It's called Jelly Bean. It's this one right here, but I think it's also going to be too bright, kind of like Sarah's Waves. Yeah. That's pretty bright. Oh, one thing that we could try. This is the Quintessence palette from Sydney Grace. This is the shade Orion Nebula. It is deeper, but I don't know if it's necessarily capturing what I'm looking for. This is the Radiant Reflection one. I don't even know how to say this. Operose? I don't know if I'm saying that right. That one almost has like a brown base to it. I do have the House of L palette from Adept, and in it there is one red shimmer. This is Kal-El. But again, this might be too bright. Oh yeah, that's like way too bright. Look at that. Yeah, as I said before, my collection is really lacking in reds. Back in this ColourPop palette, let's try Very Cherry and Juicy Juicy. Very Cherry is definitely too bright. Juicy Juicy, it's kind of pretty much like that Sydney Grace shade. I feel like every time I have a problem in these duping videos, it's always a red. In the Sunrise palette, we do have two kind of red-ish shades. Phlox seems a little bit more orange to me, and then Poppy is kind of a little too pink, but let's see. So we have Phlox and Poppy. Ah, City Life. Okay. So, looking at it, yeah, I really don't know what to do here. I think I'm just gonna have to like pick a different shade. Like that's just gonna have to be what it is, because none of these are really doing it for me in the vibes. I think the closest one would be this one, which is Jupiter's Inferno from Terra Moons, which, by the way, I said this in my Project Pan video, they are discontinuing the shadow, so if you like it, like now is your last chance, if they still have it. But I think I'm just gonna have to pull in another like grungy based shade, and I'm okay with that because I know that if I do keep this together, I can just pop Leon in when it gets here. But for now, let's find something that I would feel like okay putting in this and then using it as is, and then be able to still kind of like satiate that want. Obviously, this is a palette that would be very difficult for me to get, so it's not like I can just go out and run and buy it, but still, you know? So if we're looking for kind of grungy, black-based shadows that could be a nice pop in this palette, one that comes to mind is Soulstone right here in the Moonfall palette from Shroud. It's not red, it is like a hotter pink, but it might be able to kind of give that like, wow, that's a pop, and it goes with the rest of the palette. So that feels like a pretty good option to me. Oh, one of the reds that I didn't even swatch that I had, this is Eternal Flame from Non-Professional. It's definitely much more sheer, but could go in place. I don't know if that really does it for me. This definitely is the wrong shade of red again, but it could be an option to kind of just put in there. This is Scrumptious from Shroud. Yeah, I don't know if that's doing it for me either. Ooh, what about... This one has a really long name. Oh my god, what is this called? It's from Touch of Glam. A Deeper Connection. Like, it has green, it has orange, it might go well with some of the shades in this palette. Another one could be I could just pull in It's Britney Bitch from Touch of Glam. which this one definitely has like that wow factor, you know? I mean, I kind of want to go with It's Britney Bitch. It has that wow factor. So I'm going to pull that in. And that is the replacement for the red for me. Our next shimmer seems to be like a pinky purple with gold flecks in it. So it brings me back actually to Starburst from Terra Moons. Where's Terra Moons? So again, this shade right here. This one has blue flecks, but the base color is definitely the same. These are both from the M. Jones and Bizarre Volta collab. This is Nightmare Eyes, and this is Mountain Magic. Mountain Magic actually looks kind of what we're looking for here. So, yes, Mountain Magic. So I'm going to pop this one in. The next one seems to be like a PC. In some swatches it looks like a yellow gold, and then in some it kind of looks like a silver, which is interesting. What I think I might put here is one of these two from Shine by SD. So let's see what we got here. Because these are both like gold with silver. Again, these ones don't swatch particularly well. The top one here is Heavenly, and then this one is Mystic. I think I'm going to pull on Mystic because while the base is gold, it's still a little bit cooler, and I think that will suit this better. And then the very last shimmer is actually, I think, one of the easiest ones. It is a black base with a red or burgundy shift. So I have two that come to mind for this. The first, this is Blood Moon from Terra Moons. I feel on camera I never capture the shift of this. This always just looks like a dull black eyeshadow, but in my sight right now, looking down at this from an angle, this right here is an orangey red. So I don't know why the camera never picks this up, but I promise there is red in this. Now, a shade that I find very comparable to this, but maybe leans a little bit more like of a purple red than an orange red, is Midnight Sun from Divina. And I think based on the shift in the picture, Midnight Sun would be a bit closer. So I'm going to pull that in. Again, I'm looking in the viewfinder right now, and these both just look black. So I'm sorry. I don't know another way to show this. If somebody out there, like another creator, if you figured out a way to get these to show up on camera, please let me know, because I have no idea. Even when I do like still swatches, I'll see it in the light. Like I'll be like, oh, there's the shift. And then I'll take the picture, and then I'm like, but where'd it go? I don't know. I must be doing something wrong. Maybe it's a setting or something. Alright, so those are all of the shimmers in this palette. And then one thing that may make this a little bit easier is that the mattes are all quite neutral. They're what I'd call like grungy neutrals. So let's see what we have here. The first matte shade in this palette is one of those murky mustardy yellow shades. And the first shade in here that catches my eye as a near perfect dupe is this one. This is Taffy from Sydney Grace. I'm going to pop that in. Next we have kind of like an almost deeper but slightly more orange version of that shade, and there are, I think, two options here. This is Clementine from Dandelions Co. And then this one right here is Summer Heat from Sydney Grace. Clementine, Summer Heat. Summer Heat is definitely deeper. Let's compare it with the last shadow. I think let's pull Summer Heat. I know that that's like a terrible swatch of the last shadow, but it does do enough for me to look at the tone here. Okay, last in that top row seems to be just kind of a murky, more cool-toned brown, and my eye goes to this shade. This is Sweet Cakes from Sydney Grace. And it seems kind of like a near-perfect dupe, so I'm going to pull that one in. Next, there's like a reddy burgundy brown. And so the first one that I think of is this one right here. This is Sweet Tooth from Sydney Grace. But we do have another one here. I believe it's called like Chocolate Raspberry. Is it this one? Yes, this is Chocolate Raspberry Fudge. Honestly, this one looks like more reddy purple to me, but let's see. Anything else that might be comparable? In the Radiant Reflection palette, we have the shade Unstoppable Love. That's like almost more of a purple. Ooh, I just got deja vu. I must have like swatched these together in one of my other videos. We do have this shade right here, Take a Bite. It definitely doesn't have like a brown, but it is that like deeper base that we're looking for. I just think it's too much of like a true burgundy, huh? I think I'm just gonna go with this shade right here, which was, I think, Sweet Tooth. Sorry, this is Sweet Tooth from Sydney Grace. I'm just gonna go with this one. All these reddish shades are just staining me so bad today. Oh my god. The next shade seems to be kind of like a burnt orangey brown, but it's quite deep. The first one I put my eye to is this one right here. This is Temper from Dandelions Co. Might be a little bit brighter than what we're looking for here, but the base is definitely correct. This is Voila from Sydney Grace. Oh my god, you can't even like see that with all the staining on my hand. But no, that's like very not correct. Dearest Constant and Radiant Reflection might work. Yeah, I just don't think it's dark enough. This is Jasper from the Natasha Denona Sunrise palette. Still, this one would be darker. I think our best one here is going to be Temper, so I'm going to pop that in. The very last matte looks like a brown that is so deep, it's almost black. I don't know if I have something quite like that, so let's see what we got. I don't think any of these are like an almost black. I do have a like an almost black gray, so that might be a good backup plan. Let's see. Okay, so in my singles, I definitely don't have anything like that. One interesting switch could be the shade Commitment from the Natasha Denona Love palette. It's like, it's one of those cream to powder shades, but it's a really deep purple that's like kind of almost a black. So this might be a good backup. One that just might fit the overall color story here, this is the shade Aspiration from the My Dream palette, and it's much more of like a cool toned, deep brown. And I think I'm actually going to go with this one. I think it will serve the color story best. Here is our complete palette. Do I think it's like exactly like the palette that I based it off of? No, absolutely not. It is not. Do I think that this is kind of a nice inspired by that palette color story and I could get some looks that I think would look really cool and kind of give me the general vibe that palette might give? Yes. I do think that one of the things that could pull this palette better together, again, is that red, but I do think it's Britney Bitch kind of, my eyes continuously drawn to that shade when I look at this, just kind of like it's continuously drawn to that red. So I still think that this is a good mixture of colors here. Alright, so here is our finished palette swatched out. Again, I do think that this gives the general vibe. And again, that like one pop there is, it's Britney Bitch, and it's certainly the most like colorful shade, and my eye goes to it, so I think we did a pretty good job here. I'm pretty happy with this. Alright, that is our duping video for today. Thank you all so much for being with me here today. I'm really happy that you were here. Thank you again to Andromeda for letting me use their swatches. Please go give them a follow. Again, if any of you know that it is a specific creator that Kaima Cosmetics used their swatches and did not credit them, please let me know. I would love to give credit to that person. But again, as of right now, I'm going with the swatches came from the company themselves. If you want to see more duping videos like this, give it a thumbs up with your stained, glittery, grubby hands. Make sure to leave me a comment down below. What do you think of my dupes? Did you pick up these palettes? I hope you have a great day or night wherever you are. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay weird. Bye!